So why don't we get started here? Why don't I will say youth before beauty here, and set you
Oh,
up to go first in our five covers better than the originals, knowing that the originals must also have been great.
yeah. So I wanted to come up with covers that were, among my very favorites, which also had originals that were among my favorites. Like every song on my list is pretty much neck and neck between the original and the cover, but I do give the cover the edge. So So with that in mind, I'm going to start as high up as you can start with the Beatles. And my favorite Beatles cover of all time, which is Stevie Wonder's "We Can Work It Out," which he did in I think 1970. It was on the Signed, Sealed, and Delivered album. How can you go wrong?
Yeah, I have to say, like, as much as I love the Stevie Wonder version of it, that is a bold statement,
Mm-hmm.
sir.
That's a hot
To
take.
yeah, that's a very hot take. To suggest that a Beatles original has been outdone at all, I think, is a
Mm-hmm.
hot take. Why that one?
Well, because because that is, I think, the best that anybody's ever done with a Beatles song. Honestly, I think he does what you have to do with Beatles covers, really, with any cover. He makes it his own thing. He takes a complete left turn with it. He doesn't. He's not faithful to it, but reverent to it nonetheless. And he just makes it into a Stevie Wonder song, and it's a great Stevie Wonder song.
I have to agree. It is a great Stevie Wonder song. It is a great Beatles cover. And there's no, yeah, you can't argue with the fact that he made it his own and that it's impossible at this point to talk about that song without talking about his version of it. So while I'm not positive I could find any Beatles cover better than a Beatles original, certainly that would be way, way up there on the contention. So while I may not be aboard that train, I understand how you got there, and good on you, son. That's all right. I'm gonna stay in the '60s for myself here for a cover. The cover I'm gonna pick to go first is REM's cover of Superman, which was
Mm-hmm.
originally done by a band called The Clique. I did not do enough show prep. I cannot go tell you anything about the band The Clique. I think it would be a dramatic overstatement to refer to The Clique as a one-hit wonder. The original version of Superman was sort of obscure at the time.
Oh,
WXRT in Chicago started playing it after REM had it as a hit,
ah,
and that I didn't even know it was a cover
uh,
until I'd heard that.
yeah.
Now,
I think you're not the only one.
right. And I've gone back and I've listened to the click. It's actually really good in that sort of, you have a sort of just uh, the Clique are a relatively sort of generic rock band from the mid to late '60s doing sort of derivative music of the time, but they did strike gold with that song. Like
Yeah.
they the vocal affectations on it are dated, and the production sort of dated. But the song is solid, and I've never heard anything else in their catalog that was close. So I'm gonna say it's
Yeah.
a fluke.
Well, yeah. And the chorus, I think, particularly sounds really good on the original.
I will agree with that, but that's another reason why REM is so good, and certainly in the IRS era, they were great. That might be a show topic, by the way, is the our IRS versus Warner Brothers era for REM, and the reason that it matters is like they really didn't start becoming like a commercially viable radio band pretty much until Superman. Like
Hmm.
Superman was a single, even though it wasn't listed on the album cover that it came from. It wasn't listed on the album, but it was a single, and I think that was one of the first mainstream like FM radio station REM songs to hit. And the vocal performance, it really does show how tight they were as a band and how great the backing vocals on REM records can be. because I mean, I don't know anything about the band The Cliques. For all I know, they were vocal geniuses who were masters of harmony. And I'm not sure everybody thought of REM that way, but you can't deny how tight the arrangement is and how tight the harmonies are on the REM version. And it is superior. It's superior in almost every way. And I think it's sort of slept on in the REM catalog. I understand why. Nobody's looking to REM for covers per se. Most of their covers, I think, were B-sides. You could correct me on that. I could be wrong, but I think that's the only cover they ever had on just a mainline album, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right. And one thing about that too, trivia about that song is Michael Stipe refused to do the lead vocal on that. And that's why Mike Mills sang that song.
There are some great. I would say the fact that that's the only cover of theirs that made it onto a full album, and I think it's up there in quality with their own work. It's that good.
By the way, trivia about the band The Click.
Yes,
they were from Houston, Texas.
Interesting. Were they like fellow travelers with like 13th floor elevators? Were they like ZZ Top or whatever? Or were they around then, or were they just some concoction of a shitty record company?
I really don't know. I don't know if they had much association with other Texas bands that were more well known.
All right, that is a perfect. That's good homework for future episodes. You're up.
Okay, well, for my second pick, and by the way, maybe we should backtrack just a little bit. We were going to talk about All Along the Watchtower since we're not going to include that, but that is the obvious choice to make a list such as this.
So let's sidebar on that for a bit, which is, the genre itself, which is covers better than the originals. I think if you were to set that to a vote, like among, what on the planet at this point, I would be surprised if Jimi Hendrix All Along the Watchtower did not come in first as like a consensus global pick for the certainly most high profile example of it and probably the best example of it.
Yeah, and I think it is. And also honorable mention for that, probably a lot, considerably, obviously more overlooked. Jimmy also did a great. He did a few Dylan covers in his career, all of them great. Another one I put it right up there actually with All Along the Watchtower is when he did Like a Rolling Stone at Monterey. It's that as well is one of my favorite all-time Dylan covers.
Yeah, Bob Dylan, I think, he's been asked about Jimi Hendrix covering him a bunch of times, and I think he pretty much said like that in his own opinion, in Bob Dylan's own opinion, every time Jimi Hendrix turned his gaze towards a Bob Dylan song, that it became a Jimi Hendrix song. Like I think Bob Dylan pretty much came out and said like once he did those songs, like he really owned them. Now, that might be an overstatement in the case of like a Rolling Stone. I think Dylan's.
I don't think
Dylan
so.
still owns it. Dylan still owns it.
Yeah, but it's co-ownership. I honestly would call it co-ownership.
Ooh, we might have to we might have to box or something to settle this. Like I would say that Dylan's that the play fucking loud Judas performance of Like a Rolling Stone is
a great one.
It gives him ownership of it in perpetuity. Like that. Yeah. The cultural significance of Like a Rolling Stone for that moment, the Judas moment, and also for the fact that Dylan forced a 6-minute single down the gullet of AM radio. Like there's just too much gravity around that song and Dylan for me to say, even if Dylan said that Hendrix owned it, I couldn't go along.
Yeah, but it does. I think it says a lot about Jimi Hendrix that we can have such a discussion because it is compared to anybody else. Yeah, that's something that is Dylan's and Dylan's alone. And anybody even having the nerve to cover it is, that's that's a losing battle that you're going into. But Jimmy could do that because he was Jimmy.
Think of the torture, though, it must be for Bob Dylan, or for that matter, the Beatles. Think of just the torture of having how many just dreadful covers of your masterpieces. Like, has anybody been victimized by covers more than Bob Dylan? I can't think of anybody. Like, how many like in the 60s, there had to be at least 1,000 album, whatever. Joe Blow plays Dylan. There has to be 1,000 of those, probably 900 of Joe Blow plays the Beatles, and 99.99% of them are unlistenable pap and have absolutely like no relevance whatsoever. They died with the people who bought it,
Yeah, I would say maybe up there with Dylan though would be somebody like Chuck Berry. There's a lot of mediocre Chuck Berry covers, obviously, in the world.
Yeah, and it's shameless how bad he was ripped off. I mean, I love Brian Wilson, but I mean, like, I think you could say that there's some Beach Boys moments that are lifts of Chuck Berry that weren't credited.
Well, I think eventually they were.
That may be true. That may be true. Yeah, the Dylan thing and the Jimi Hendrix thing, I respect your opinion, even if I don't hold it myself. I will say that Jimmy did own most of the songs he covered after he did them. But here's a hot take for you. The one that he did not own, even though his cover is fantastic and world class in almost every regard, he does not own Wild Thing by the Troggs. There's your hot take.
Oh. Okay. I don't know. I probably disagree, but anyway, that's for another time. That's a sidebar for another day.
Yeah. So your Stevie Wonder is first for you, and second, you're giving your number 2 position.
Okay. So and we aren't ranking them, by the way.
No, we're not ranking. We're not ranking. You're right.
But yeah, the second one I'm putting out there. I'm gonna go next with "Boy in the Bubble" by Patti Smith.
Oh.
And Patti Smith, and okay, so I should have gone back and looked at this. She put out a covers album, and right now I don't remember the title of it. I don't remember what year it came out. But she did a covers album, and she did a version of "Boy in the Bubble" that, honestly, like, to me, it just blows the original away. It's really, really solid. The band playing on it, great. Her vocals, great. Her delivery, the way she delivers certain lines, like the baby with the baboon heart. When you hear her, the way that she delivers it, you're really thinking that Paul Simon dropped the ball when he did it originally. And by the way, I love the original. That's why, it's on the list. These are originals I love, as well as covers I love. And like I said, they're neck and neck. This one's probably the one I think takes the biggest leap from the original to the cover, though. I think Patti Smith nailed it.
This is a hot take from, in my opinion. I think the original is fantastic, and I think her version is great too. I feel like that original, though, one, the video is great. Two, nothing really sounds like that record, but that record. That bass sound, that sort of that fretless, that super rubbery bass. Like, I don't look at Paul Simon's arrangements usually and think of him as being a super technical musician, or you know what I mean, or like a musician's musician. He's a songwriter. He's a
So you know what I will say. I think you're right about the playing on that. I am unhappy with the mix. I think it's one of those that, most albums in that time were mixed that way, and they don't sound that great as a result. But yeah, the playing is great. The band, everybody's playing on it, great. It really could have been mixed better, which is so common for records of that era.
That original version by Paul Simon, I think, influenced, the Lou Reed records around that era or just after that era really are heavily Magic and Lost. That that same sort of like rubbery bass, that fretless bass just being mixed in so high and played in that sort of same range. Like, I think that's a little bit of lift from Paul Simon, and I definitely think like Peter Gabriel's Digging in the Dirt from that time was another one that borrowed that same. I understand your point about the mix, but I think that mix and that arrangement and those sounds were lifted and beaten into the ground after Paul Simon did it by the likes of the Lou Reeds and the Peter Gabriels, and it sort of made it sound a little samey. But if you go back and listen to the original in headphones, I mean, that thing fucking delivers. I'm a fan of Graceland in general, and I actually, if I may throw a hot take of my own in on your choice, is "Boy in the Bubble" is the best song on Graceland.
Yep. Oh no, I am 100% in agreement on that. I think it is the best song on Graceland. By the way, though, so the album that comes from, the Patti Smith album that comes from is called 12. It's 12 covers, and it came out in 2007.
All right, that's definitely going in my queue for the week. I'm interested for sure. All right, I'm gonna do my second one here. This is so obscure. I can forgive all who just don't care. But if you'll follow me, if you'll come along with me and go to the sort of outer fringes of popular music for a moment, my number two is from a guy named Eugene Chadbourne, who is a free jazz guitarist of sorts. He's never had a hit. I don't think he's probably played ever to an audience bigger than of 100 people. I myself have the fringes of my musical taste definitely go that direction. They go towards, I like the free jazz stuff. I like the out stuff. When I moved to New York in the 90s, Eugene Chadbourne, I can't prove this, but I am 99% sure he was still like busking in the East Village. I could swear he came in and played and passed the hat at a coffee shop at St. Mark's and A, in like 1997. Like, I swear I saw him do that. And then years later, I saw him play at the Stone, which is like this totally like it's run by John Zorn, so it's real left field shit. So Dr. Eugene Chadbourne plays just freaked out guitar shit. He's fantastic. Some of his stuff is insufferable, but for the most part, he does great jazz covers and he just plays super out there. He does a cover of the Phil Oakes song, "A Knock on the Door," that it's one of my favorite just recordings in general. It's on an album of his called Songs. It's on Spotify. But Phil Oakes was really ahead of his time. We live in very politically polarized times. Phil Oakes was sort of that true believer, that left-wing troubadour, that original folky. He wrote "Love Me, I'm a Liberal." He wrote a bunch of like real lefty, like one of the last great true lefty folk songwriters. And Eugene Chadbourne is reverent, and he plays it like by his standards, it's a relatively straight arrangement, but he's like a one-man machine with that song. So if you'll humor me and just in a way, like the original is so great and the lyrics are just everything I want from lefty folk music, Phil Oakes did in "Knock on the Door." It's haunting, it's intense, it's absolutely conceptually just it's as tight as a mosquito's ass. And you then take Eugene Chadbourne, who plays the opposite of tight, and he is able to take this sort of 60s lefty folk sentiment and bring it into this completely scattered, wigged out 90s, no wave or whatever. I don't even know how to classify it, but humor an old man, dig up the Phil Oakes "Knock on the Door," and then dig up Eugene Chadbourne's "Knock on the Door. I expect if I can get even one other person to listen to it and love it, this will all be worth it.
All right. Well,
I don't expect more after that. It's not a mic drop moment. It's a thanks for indulging me moment. Let's get on to some normal stuff.